Howdy, folks. We are back, yes, again, with another episode of Unfinished Business, the November edition. Of course, I am Jeff Gallishaw, Unfinished B2 now, or Projector J1, on Instagram. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Andre Joseph.
Andre Joseph of AJ Epics Productions at AJEPYX on Twitter and Instagram.
Introduction's done. You should know us by now, really. But this month, I should say week, there are a bunch of stories. Unfortunately, one is the passing of another screen legend. Sean Connery, unfortunately, passed away at the age of 90. I mean, come on, this man lived the full life. I will admit, I wasn't the biggest Sean Connery fan. My introduction to him was in the movie Family Business. So I am late in life in seeing all the him as 007. And realistically, if it was not for the cinephiles, I probably would have wrote off Sean Connery to a certain degree. But then when we were doing the show, they wanted to review a film called The Hill, directed by Sidney Lumet and starring Sean Connery. And that film, first of all, it's a masterpiece. If you haven't seen it, you have to. But that was the film that finally convinced me that this guy was not a movie star. He could actually be a true actor. And that film is just beautiful. And I mean, looking back at his career, Sidney Lumet seemed to be the person he worked with or collaborated with the most. And even when, because he made Family Business, but even when they made bad films, there was something interesting. But he also got Sean Connery more out of his comfort zone, it seems, with movies like The Anderson Tapes and even Family Business, where he's playing Jewish, which is weird for a Scotsman. But, and it's just, there's endless movies with Sean Connery. And, of course, there's always great stories that people tell about either being interviewed or interviews with him. Like one of the screenwriters who was working on his last film, Josiah's Cannon, told a funny story about him working on that film and working with Brett Ratner, which you can find on Twitter, where ultimately he got fed up and just decided, you know what, rather than take this $18 million paycheck, I'd rather just go write my memoirs. And that would have been his last film he had been in. And unfortunately, the last film we will see him on screen in was The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which he notoriously hated working on and made him want to retire in the first place. Because I believe it was because when it became more about the special effects more than the actual story or characters. That's what I have to say about Sean Connery. I know you love the Sean Connery as an actor and as a person, so I'll let you, Andre, talk about your Sean Connery memories.
Well, I just wrote a whole blog about this if you want to check it out on Coates' blog right now. What I would say about him is when my first introduction to Sean was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I didn't see it in the theater when it came out. I just remember the TV spots and, I'd already seen Temple of Doom on television. So seeing that there was a new Indiana Jones film, it was kind of interesting to see him team up with his father. And he seemed like an old guy back then, too. He was only like 58 when he shot that movie, but he played it up like he was probably in his 60s or 70s. So, it wasn't really until the 90s when the Bond films started coming out on TV a lot, and they kept going back to his movies, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and the other movies. And I started to get into Bond little by little, especially when Brosnan took over GoldenEye and started going back to all those movies. And even then, and at that time in the 90s when he was huge with, Untouchables, Rising Sun, Red October, The Rock. I mean, he was definitely like a badass on screen, no matter what age he was. He could have his receding hairline and still be a credible action hero. And like you said, let's not forget the fact that aside from that comeback period where he was playing sort of the mentor role to a number of actors who were big at the time, like Kevin Costner and Alec Baldwin, but those, unrecognizable roles that he did, especially in the 60s and 70s, like The Hill, The Anderson Tapes, The Offense, which I think was one of his best performances. If Eric Cohen was here, he would mention movies like Robin and Marion and Under the Lion. So, he had a very diverse type of body of work that made him more than just James Bond, but just made him just, he had a gravitas to him, a presence that undoubtedly, even if the movie was bad, you knew he was somebody that would make it interesting, and he would never phone it in. So, it sucks that Leader Extraordinary Gentlemen was his last movie. I'd like to think that he could have ended it with Finding Forrester, because that's a movie I love personally. I think maybe a better writer because of that film. But he got out when I think it was right, because he turned down The Matrix, he turned down Lord of the Rings, and they say, oh, it was because he didn't understand the material. But really, at that point in time, getting into the 70s and the industry getting more into special effects driven movies, I can understand where he was coming from, in that it wasn't about performance anymore. It was about just a roller coaster ride of going to the movies and not really being as gripped into performances the way he was brought up with the directors that he worked with. So, it's sad that we lost him, but like you said, he lived a very long life. I mean, the fact that he made it to 90 is a miracle in itself. And I think Idris Elba and other actors have taken up the mantle from him in terms of the essence on the big screen. And I don't feel like he's gone when I watch his movies now. I just think he is ingrained in the culture enough, especially raising such a high bar as Bond, that as good as Daniel Craig is, he still cannot hold a candle to Connery. And I mean, I just say Godspeed to the man for living as long as he did and have the impact that he did on film.
Well, I think Sean Connery, one of the reasons why he's so legendary the way he is because obviously by now he's an icon just for how many roles he took, but he left his personal stamp on each role. And no offense to a lot of actors today, he had something a lot of them seem to lack, which is just personal charisma that he brings to every role. That was what worked, especially in the James Bond movies I've seen with him, is that he had a certain swagger that worked, I never met him, but it didn't seem like he had that necessarily in life, or the same swagger that he had on screen. It was just something that I hate to sound like a commercial. He had a certain manliness about him, Yeah, it was just like that. Go ahead.
I mean, people, like, when Goldfinger came out, I can tell you, like, my dad and people around that age range when they were young, they wanted to look like him. They wanted to buy the suit. They wanted to buy an Aston Martin. White guys wanted to, cut their hair like him. And I would say, Peter Hyams, of all people, really talked a lot about two things that make Connery so special as an actor. One is he's not a bullshit artist. It's like when you work with him, he wants you to be straight up. If you know something, great. If you don't, then just say it. Don't go and try to, like, fiddle around. And that's kind of a lost art with actors today who just like to be control freaks. He wants to know what's happening. He wants to be directed. And at the same time, another aspect of him that's interesting is even when he doesn't speak, he could tell a lot with his eyes. And, especially as films became more technological driven, you could see, like, whether it's an Outland or The Rock or any kind of role where he's kind of having to play it minimal, or Name It a Rose. All you have to do is just look at the guy, and he could say a lot without saying nothing. And it's just his presence alone makes you pay attention very close.
But usually he was the most memorable part of many of the movies he was in. Like you said, Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, which is a great movie, but you remember him by the end of it, most of all, more than anything else in that film. Untouchables, definitely, even though it has iconic directing, but let's face it, he walks away with the film, even with De Niro playing, Al Capone, the villain, throughout.
Well, he made David Mamet's dialogue into such gold because everybody else around him, if you think about it, was sort of playing it like, masterpiece theater. And, you got Kevin Costner, what was his star-making role, but, he had that frustration of the fact that he had to play Elliot Ness like a square. But when you put him with Connery, he has a little bit more grit to him that comes out, especially, you know, by the third act of the film. And that was a testament to what Connery could do. He could take a guy like Kevin Costner or Alec Baldwin or Wesley Snipes and raise their game on such a high level. I can't say the same with Mark Harmon and the Presidio, but I mean, you know, anybody he worked with had to like so say, okay, I got to be on my shit, because when you're on screen with that guy, he's going to definitely take the attention away from you.
Definitely. So unfortunately, we have to say a rest in peace to Sean Connery. He's never going to be forgotten, no matter what that article about millennials not wanting to watch classic films says. For our next news story that has been brought up is that people of color, actors of color, particularly Lashana Lynch in the new James Bond movie and John Boyega in the Star Wars films, have been getting picked on online for the roles they take. And John Boyega, being outspoken as ever, says that he feels it's part of the studio's responsibility to protect them when it comes to like online harassment and all of these things. I personally, I can see it both ways, but I kind of agree to a certain extent. How do you feel about this?
Well, you know, it's a business at the end of the day, right? So
yes,
it's whatever roles come your way that a reasonable amount of money and could speak to the actor that they feel like they want to take it on. And I think in Boyega's case, I can't speak so much for the actress, but I mean, we talked about it with Star Wars. You know, you get offered a Star Wars movie, it doesn't matter what race you are, you want to jump at because
exactly.
you're part of a bigger legacy and who hasn't grown up with it. But then, you know, to kind of get stiffed in terms of where your character goes in the story because of you know, we're going to play diversity, but that doesn't necessarily mean like you know, you're going to be the central focus, then there is something wrong with that. There is something that's leading that this business still has to kind of figure out. Like it's, I guess it goes back into this question about, you know, is Hollywood too woke? And while there has to be that need for progression without question, you can't just go and say, well, okay, because we're casting a black person in a role that would typically be a white character, that makes us feel like we're empowered. Like, no, let that person be the right person for the role, regardless of what their race is. And I think we also, in the community of film fanatics and lovers of cinema, we have to be kind of cautious of that. You know, of course, call it out if it's a stereotype, but don't try to like go after these guys based on whatever choices that they make. They still got to feed their families. They still got to, you know, get the roles as much as they can, because it could dry up easily tomorrow if they're not working. So it's like people got to calm down on that shit.
I agree because, okay, I think the studio does have a bear certain responsibility because after all, you're investing in these actors in these roles. So you should always protect your investment too. But I can understand fanboys who, you know, I'm not really a big fan of in the first place. But if they want to write their opinion, yay, everybody has a right to their opinion. But when you start personally attacking an actor or even maybe their family, you've taken it too far because, again, it's a film after all. And I can understand certain iconic roles. Again, you know, traditionally they have always been maybe played by, you know, Caucasian actors, like let's say James Bond. But I remember when they were even thinking about casting, for instance, Idris Elba in the 007, everybody went crazy online. And my thing is, look, I'm not the biggest Idris Elba fan. I have no problems with him personally. But my thing is, I have no problem with that casting, for instance. You know, it's like, it's not like he's a horrible actor. He wasn't the flavor of the month at the time when they wanted to cast him. He was somebody who was actually right age at the time. He had, you know, he has all this acting experience behind him. He's obviously athletic. So I'm like, and you know, he can do the role. So what was the problem? The only problem with him that I could see and that other people pointed out was the color of his skin. That was it. You know, it's sort of like when, and it kind of is ridiculous because, like, I think of even that shitty Daredevil movie with Ben Affleck when Michael Clark Duncan was cast as Kingpin. Who else physically resembles that role but Michael Clark Duncan? I mean, the only difference, yeah, it's the only thing is his color of skin. So that is the only reason I could see before the movie came out, people having a problem with that movie. If anything, I was more upset Ben Affleck playing Daredevil than anything else, and Jennifer Garner playing Elektra, but that's a whole different subject. So I just thought that was a good story, and, you know, multiple point of views from that story, but it's something that needs to be brought up more because, you know, I even remember, this shows you my age, when they made Much Ado About Nothing and they cast Denzel Washington in it, and it was like, but wait, how is Keanu Reeves his brother? And it's like, the whole point of the thing was casting. I mean, those weren't names to shake at, but who best can play the role also, no matter what color. And, you know, while Much Ado About Nothing, the Kenneth Branagh version, is no classic, it's still an interesting film to watch, and you don't get distracted by, hey, these people are of two different races, but yet they're the same family. So it's just like little things like that.
If you're rebooting or remaking, you know, another Batman movie or, you know, like you say, with Shakespeare, I mean, who cares at a certain point who you pick as so-and-so because of their race? It's just, look, it's a different interpretation. And, exactly. You know, actually, one of the movies that I have on my list that we'll talk about later had some race reversal, and I didn't have an issue with it, but I did have an issue with the movie itself, and I keep those issues completely separate.
Okay. Okay, so moving on. I know this one hits you the hardest, this next one. Johnny Depp has been cut out of the cast of the next Fantastic Beasts movie. And to that, but first, he does still get his $10 million paycheck, though, even though he doesn't have to be in the movie or was cut from the movie. Now, when I heard this story, my first thought was, why are they making another Fantastic Beasts movie? Because at this point, it just seems like they're going through the motions. Because at least, I mean, I didn't know I'm out of a certain age range, but I haven't heard anybody like, you know what I can't wait for? The next Fantastic Beasts sequel. Because let's face it, these are stories based on something that was a little piece of the series of Harry Potter books. And, I mean, they did this before when they made those, I don't even remember the name of the movies, but Shailene Woodley, these young adult, I don't know if it's like Insurgent was the book series.
Divergent.
Yeah. And where basically they realized, even when they came to the final part, like, these movies make enough money, but nobody really cares about how this concludes. So they just canceled the franchise. And personally, I'll admit I'm not a big fan of these movies. But I have no problem just canceling it at this part and just have J.K. Rowling write the last one as a book. I'm sure there'll be plenty of transphobia in it from her. So, but how do you feel about this? I guess because of maybe his more personal behavior, it seems like they have decided to part ways with the actor. Mind you, they have a writer who's transphobic, but they have no problem cutting them out of it because they're the creator. But Johnny Depp, yes, we must get rid of him. He's a public nuisance. How do you feel about this?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not a Harry Potter fan. I'm certainly not a Fantastic Beasts fan. It's kind of messed up because, I mean, some of the stuff that's coming out with that whole case with him and Amber Heard, I think there's more evitatory evidence out there to kind of, you know, redeem him. That's probably not getting out in the public because the court of public opinion has already made up their mind that he's an abuser, but I'll keep that issue separate.
Okay.
I think personally, my issue isn't even so much that he's been cut out of this role. I think he just needs better material, really.
I agree.
The Johnny Depp that we all grew up with after 21 Jump Street was this genius actor that could do just about anything, whether it was Edward Scissorhands, What's Eating Gilbert Grape, Benny and June, you know, Donnie Brasco. Like, that's the Johnny Depp I want to see more of on the screen. I feel like after Pirates of the Caribbean, he fell into this trap where, like, let's see how many other roles he could play where he could, play dress up and, be all wacky and whatnot. And I think he just kind of overdid it after a while. And I think, sure, he's tried to play some straight parts, but nothing that's really registered with an audience these days. And I think he needs to go back to his roots somehow. Maybe just go completely out of the box and do something that we don't expect him to do. But come on, I mean, there's something that happens when you get paid a lot of money and you start taking a lot of garbage that doesn't really benefit you artistically. It's like, this is a guy who got off of 21 Jump Street because he didn't want to be a heartthrob. He wanted to play more roles that were of substance. Now you pay this guy a shit ton of money, and now he's just doing crappy blockbusters. And it doesn't feel right to me. I want the artistic Johnny Depp back, not the one that's taking the $15 million.
Hey man, I'm tired of this Hollywood Johnny Depp. Back when he used to even look better on screen. Nowadays he looks like crap. What was the name of the film where he played the detective investigating the Tupac and Biggie murders?
They changed the title several times. City of Lies.
Okay, yeah, I could see him trying to do that, maybe to stretch and play maybe a normal average role, but even that didn't even get released, and that had Forrest Whitaker in it too. And my thing with Johnny Depp, like you said, I knew we were heading down a bad path when he not only made Pirates of the Caribbean, but also a little thriller with Charlize Theron called The Astronaut's Wife. That I saw in theaters, and I was just like, this is not the Johnny Depp I know. Ninth Gate, as bad as it is, I can understand why he takes movies like that back in his artistic. It was a Hollywood movie, but at least at the time it was directed by Roman Polanski, a directing legend. So that was more incitement for him to take the role. But now it's like, hey, I'm going to play the Mad Hatter in all these Alice in Wonderland movies. And it's just like, I'd rather not. Or I guess whenever Tim Burton has a movie for him, he takes it up. Those I can understand a little more, as that is Tim Burton's muse. But then when it comes, like, again, to all these other Hollywood films, it's just like, even when he was in, what was it, Murder on the Orient Express, this felt like more like stunt casting. Like he was a name to pad out the cast, and spoiler alert, he's the murder victim early in the film. So he's already out of the movie. So it's just, Johnny, even if you have to go the Nicolas Cage route of just taking movies for paychecks, at least out of, let's say, 5 bad films, there's one gold nugget in a Nicolas Cage movie career. If Johnny has to do that, go for it, but at least pick something a little more challenging, other than a paycheck. I know you might have a lifestyle right now you have to support, but you can do better, and you can do better. So, good luck to Mr. Depp and his personal problems and his on-screen life problems. Next, this is more of a celebratory. Before writing his 10th and final movie, Quentin Tarantino just signed a 2-book deal to write not only the novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, for all of you who couldn't get enough of that movie, like me, but also he's going to write a book full of cinematic essays based on movies of the 70s. He's also going to do reviews, I guess, his commentary on movies of the 70s. And, short of him making a new movie, this is very exciting for me because, if I could pre-order it right now, good or bad, I would order it because it also gives a little more insight into like his movie viewing mind, even though, once in a while he'll give an interview where he just rambles off a list of movies. But here, now you have something that is more permanent that you can always just use as a reference guide if you want to. How do you feel about this?
I think he's preparing for a second career because I don't know when he's going to do his last movie, but I think this has been kind of coming for a while for him to get into more writing, which I think is really where his strengths are, and to get more of his viewpoints on classic Hollywood, especially in the 70s and the 60s. It's going to be worthwhile to read. I can't wait to check it out.
Yes, always a pleasure anytime anything new comes out. Even if I might, even personally, if I don't love it, at least I find it interesting, whatever he writes or any new interview he comes out with. Because even if I don't agree or like it, it makes me want to investigate more of the things he's talking about or other films, directors, and titles he's talking about. Keeping on this more fun theme, Spike Lee is directing a new musical for film that he co-wrote that is about, wait for it, the creation of Viagra. Now, the music from the film will be written by the same songwriting team who wrote the Tony Award-winning musical Passing Strange, which Spike Lee also directed, or I should say more captured on film to put out, for the masses on HBO. I'm very excited because I really liked Passing Strange. And I think Spike Lee more or less is experimenting a little more because he's obviously done drama. He's obviously done, comedy, all these different genres to the best of his ability. So other than Chirac and filming, a lot of Broadway shows, this is the closest to him making his own kind of original on-screen musical. Because I remember he wanted to make Rent before it became the film that we know now, into a movie with him directing, and I believe he also wanted Justin Timberlake to play one of the roles. That shows you how long ago that was. And how are you feeling about this?
Yeah, I think it's a cool move. He's touched on musicals previously. I mean, the musical scenes in School Days and in Chirac, and I'm sure there's others that will come to mind that people will tell me about. I think it's kind of a long time coming for him to do something like that, and certainly Viagra being the topic of discussion here. It should be pretty interesting. It's going to be very political.
I just find it interesting, like if he ever went to do research on this film and asking all these questions about Viagra, if they're like, and he's like, no, it's for research, and them being like, sure it is. For what though? So that's the picture I have in my mind, but I will be there for it. I will want to see I'm talking about the movie, y'all. I will be interested to see when it's being filmed as the cast takes place, and to see, a trailer for it, Next up, unfortunately, they want to make a new Transformers movie, a new reboot, directed by Stephen Capall Jr., who directed Creed 2. Now, I think by now people should know I'm not the biggest fan of these movies. I enjoyed, what was the one? Oh, see? Brain just... No, not the... Oh, God, no. What was the spin-off movie that came out a few... Bumblebee. That was decent. That one, I would say, that to me is what the Transformers first movie should have felt like watching. So with this new reboot, I'm like, again, it goes back to the Fantastic Beast conversation. Like, who's really wanting it? Who's asking for another one? Why are we still in the Transformers business of movies? At least not for another 20 years. I know you are more interested in the Transformers films than I am. So how do you feel, or what are you thinking about this business move?
Well, I pretty much have gone on record saying that Bumblebee, which I did not look forward to, and I didn't see it in the theater when it came out, but when I did see it on video, I've gone on record saying that the first 3 minutes of that movie were the best Transformers movie ever produced in live action.
You're not the first person I've heard say that, too.
Yeah, I mean, it really went back to nostalgia of what every Transformers fan grew up with. Now, granted, it was done in a very Spielberg-like way, like E.T. or even its knockoff Mac and Me. But I like all the subtleties that they added in there, that kind of tied back to the classic '86 animated movie and, the toy line itself. And my understanding is this new movie is supposed to be a follow-up to Bumblebee. And I've always said that when you don't have the franchise in Michael Bay's hands, it actually ends up being directed much better than what he's done. So, I mean, I liked Creed 2, and I thought it was pretty consistent with what Ryan Coogler did. I think Steven here will do a fantastic job, and depending on where they take it, My hope is more of those same 3 minutes with the characters done the way they should be, look exactly like they did in the cartoon and in the toy line. And I think you can make the best Transformers movie, period, without all that other dorky shit that Bay tried to do.
I agreed. I still won't be waiting for it, but if I hear good things, maybe I'll check it out. And for my final story, personally, until I hand it over to your news stories, is David Fincher was interviewed about his new movie, Mank, about the making of Citizen Kane. And of course, he had some opinions. First, I'll go with the good opinions, or the more favored opinions, where he talks about how hard it is to get a smaller movie made, even with his reputation. And I mean, his last movie was Gone Girl, a hit critically and financially. And here he is trying to make a movie about the making of a movie and how hard it was for him just to get funding in the first place for it, or even get a studio interested in it. Whereas if he just had picked up, let's say, any old children's book and said, I've got an idea for a franchise, they'd give him like almost the keys to the studio to make it. And I've always found this interesting that studios now would rather bet big on something, paying like 100+ million for something and hope they just recap their money, versus something they'd only have to put, let's say, 10 million into, but could end up netting them, quadruple money back. And so not only that, but it also seems like it goes back to also what Scorsese has been saying. It's really hard to be an auteur today because you can't ride on, let's say, your reputation alone or your past hits. It's like, no, your movie has to be making like $100 million, or it has to be a franchise starter for anybody in Hollywood to really even take notice of you anymore. Even, let's say, if you have 10 Oscars, maybe that's why it seems like Steven Spielberg will only take more prestige projects as directing, but he'll produce. Yay, you bring him something interesting, he'll produce it. And how do you feel about that?
He's not wrong, especially given the fact that I remember when I was younger and he was the front runner to direct Mission Impossible 3. I thought that was going to be exciting until he dropped out because he and Tom Cruise didn't see eye to eye, and Cruise is not big on auteur directors when it comes to that franchise.
He doesn't like anybody he can't control.
But like what you brought up, it's totally correct, because I'm thinking of all the directors now that are considered hot property, and most of them are doing mostly franchises. I mean, the Russo brothers, it's because of Marvel that they actually have like a big career right now, and anybody's even talking about them. Ryan Coogler, who everybody seems to think is like the next big thing, other than Fruitvale Station, everything he's done has mostly been Creed and Black Panther, and he hasn't had anything planned in between. Well, we obviously know Black Panther 2's situation, but it doesn't seem like there's anything else announced that he's going to be doing that seems original. And Ava DuVernay, her stuff is mostly Netflix. And as far as anything major, Wrinkle in Time, supposed to do the New Gods, you're not really hearing about her doing anything original for theatrical release.
Exactly.
And I could go on and on. I mean, it's just a lot of the guys now are, unless you're Jordan Peele, who has that recognition of saying, okay, I got a new movie coming out and it's going to be an event because everybody loved Get Out and they love Us. But it's harder now to get to that point where you could be a Scorsese or a Fincher or Spielberg or Ron Howard, because the business is more geared towards tentpoles. And unless you're going to build your own brand in some other out-of-the-box way, it's just going to make it much more difficult to get something original made now, unless you can convince a studio like you have clout that you can actually sell. So, yeah, I'm dealing with it now, with my own original stuff that's hard to get funding for, and feeling like if I went and did something that was like comic book related, it might get more attention than, say, something that just came out of my head that I think is more like something that you would see in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s.
Well, and also, I guess he commented on the Joker movie, which he said he felt was unfair to people with mental illnesses. and he obviously did not like the movie. I have my reservations when it comes to the Joker. I don't think it's a horrible movie. It's very far from being original to me, but I can say it made me feel bad for after watching it. But I don't think it's a horrible movie. Any thoughts on his?
No, I think it really depends on how you look at that movie. I mean, clearly, going in, the guy's going to be psychologically damaged. I think it's more. I think people get more caught up in the fact that they borrowed so much from Scorsese's work, and
exactly that's my major problem.
To Taxi Driver, King of Comedy, and obviously it's not supposed to connect to anything. It's supposed to stand on its own, and hopefully they stay that way. I think it's there's a lot of things I like about the film, and I've seen it twice now, and think that it's brilliant, and Joaquin Phoenix definitely deserved the Oscar for it, and I'm glad that he paid homage to Heath Ledger. But in terms of is it bad for mentally ill people? I really don't know. I think all that's blown over out of proportion, given how everybody thought, well, this movie's coming out, there's going to be another shooting in a theater, and nothing like that happened. People just sort of overreacted over one incident, and movies are movies, and everybody knows who this character is. So what are you supposed to expect? Is it supposed to be much lighter and fun, like what we got in Suicide Squad? I don't know. I don't think there's really much of an argument to be making there. If you want to talk about, say, like, enjoying Silence of the Lambs because of Hannibal Lecter, does that make it psychologically troubling? I don't know.
Well, I'm like, either way, I enjoy, well, I can't say enjoy, but I thought Joker was maybe a little more, was just better than Birds of Prey. I'll just go with that. And I believe you had a news story you wanted to bring up also.
Yeah, it'll be the only one that I'm going to bring up here. It's TV related, the return of Dexter on Showtime.
Okay.
So all I'll say here is, and I don't know how many people watching this have watched the show, but there were a lot of issues with the way the series ended after 8 seasons. And honestly, the first 3 or 4 were pretty strong. Some might even say the first 2, and then it kind of went downhill by the 5th year. And a lot of people really had problems with how hastily they ended it, and the way that the character, spoiler alert, fakes his death and goes off living in the woods somewhere with no identity. So now supposedly this is going to be exciting. This has been planned for some time now, that this is going to be a 10-episode arc. They have some of the original guys from the first season coming back to direct and to write the script, and they're not going to leave any stones unturned. So they're not going to undo any damage from past seasons, but instead it's going to pick up a decade after the series ended, and you're going to see, where this guy is, and, what kind of life he's going to lead, and pretty much, I guess, shit starting up again. They didn't say if any of the other characters are coming back, but I'm excited as long as it's Michael C. Hall. It's not a remake. I'm all for it.
I wish I could be as excited as you are about it. I hated the way it ended. This feels this kind of feels like he's coming out of witness protection almost to take care of one last deal before he retires and sails off to the Bahamas. I hold my reservation to see it, but first of all, I have a problem with you killed off one of your best characters early in the show, Dokes. Ever since his character left, the show has felt kind of empty to me. But also, I mean, who's really left to return other than Dexter? It's like you have some characters who are still living, but it's just like, hey, I thought you were dead, Dexter. And it comes down to this whole rebooting. Like, I will admit, as a fan of many television shows, I get that initial excitement hearing, oh, we're going to do another season or it's coming back. But then, unfortunately, after you get off the nostalgia of it coming back, you also realize this really didn't need to be done. Like, why is this? Why? Like, I'm thinking specifically, unfortunately, of like Will and Grace. It was like you set up everything for a finale, then you bring it back. We're going to undo half of the stuff we just gave you in that finale 10 years ago. And now we're just going to keep it going like nothing happened. But it did. You know, it's like now you want the show to continue, but you're taking me into an alternate universe. So then it kind of destroys my following of the show. While it might work for a show like Gilmore Girls, you know, where it's like, oh, we're catching up with the characters. But, you know, they didn't totally tell us, oh, by the way, that whole last season never happened. So take it from season 6 instead of 7, and now we're 10 years later. So it's just like, so I took a detour and I'm supposed to forget that other life. That's sort of like me being in a jury. I hear something, but then you tell me, in your decision, don't base it on anything you just heard. Kind of too late. So that is my theory. I'm willing to watch it. I'm glad Michael C. Hall's back working again on something. You know, I haven't seen him since Game Night, so I'm really interested in that. So now we're going to move on to our next segment, usually the second half of our show, which is what have we seen lately? I know, everybody's favorite. Hold the applause, y'all. Hold the applause. This will be interesting because most of the movies I've seen were movies on past shows. You kept saying, have you seen this? Have you seen this? And I'm like, no, not yet. No, not yet. Now I have seen them. First, I'm going to start with, of course, the one everybody in the audience has probably seen and is mad I didn't see. Bill and Ted Face the Music. And I finally watched it. I broke down and I watched it for a lower price. So I will say, now, mind you, after this, before this, I watched this with my mom, actually, and she really enjoyed it, and she didn't remember seeing part 2, so we had to rewatch that one right after we watched this one. But obviously, my mother loved Bill and Ted Face the Music. I liked it. You know, it's a feel-good movie. It gives you plenty of nostalgia. It makes you happy. It's not, you know, I wouldn't say it's a smart movie, but it's a movie that just, especially if you're a fan of the franchise, it just gives you a warm feeling and a sense of closure for it. And, you know, while, you know, Keanu Reeves looks strange without facial hair these days, I won't say it's the best made film, but I think it's another hit for Dean Paris-Scott, who directed the cult sci-fi hit Galaxy Quest. He's got another feel-great movie that a lot of people will be able to identify with, I believe. And it even brought back my man Death. So, you know, William Sadler gets to shine in the sun again. Again, they kept to the franchise thing of recasting the princesses, you know, yet again. But, you know, it didn't take me out of the movie. Though I like that in this film, the biggest rock star they found to be in it, Kid Cudi. You know, I was like, okay, I'll go with it. Why not? No offense to that man. And we all know you loved it. Yeah. So anything to add or do you have a movie you want to introduce that you recently saw?
Well, I loved it, so I don't have to really say too much about it. So I'll just jump into the next movie that I want to talk about, and that is Robert Zemeckis' remake of The Witches. Because I had nothing else to do on Halloween night, I figured I'd just watch it just because it was on.
Okay.
And I'm like, wow, this is terrible. This is like... Look, I grew up on the Nicholas Rogue version, which they changed from the book with the ending, and here, yes. Spoiler alert, they keep the ending of the book. But I just, I want to root for Robert Zemeckis because I grew up with Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and I do think he's an incredibly talented director. But lately, he has just been striking out so much. So they try to do this whole thing where, first off, they race reverse the main character. So you have Octavia Spencer as the grandmother. You have this little black kid playing the kid that turns into the mouse, and it's the same premise. But now it's like, instead of, I think the original was in England. Here it's like some southern hotel, and maybe it's a little bit racist without saying so. It's just, you get Anne Hathaway playing the Angelica Houston part, and everybody's in the uproar because of the, she's 3-fingered handed, and like I don't give a crap about that. I mean, I try to rate the movie on its merits, and I feel like it was. I don't think it was kind of hastily done. It got to its third act very quickly. It's not creepy or scary at any moment. I mean, it almost plays like Lovecraft Country, but without all the sleazy sexiness. It just was one of those movies that I'm like, Robert Zemeckis, you should be doing better than this. What is this crap you're feeding my children? I don't know. I didn't like it.
Well, I can't say I didn't see it. I just noticed when I saw way too many recognizable actors in it, it's taking away a certain enjoyment. Like the first one was such an oddity. You had Angelica Houston, but that was really the only person you recognized in the whole movie as somewhat a star of the film. So it with anonymity, it makes it scarier because you believe them as the characters. They don't seem like, this is Stanley. Like, for instance, this is Stanley Tucci playing the uptight hotel manager. This is Anne Hathaway playing the witch. This is Octavia Spencer playing the saintly grandmother. There it's just like I'm aware I'm watching a movie more or less. Whereas when I watch the original The Witches, again, I like you, I grew up with it, but there's something. It's more mysterious to me. It's an oddity. I don't know what's going to happen, even if I've read the story, because it's just so grotesque that anything could happen. With this, it's, Robert Zemeckis, so it's kind of like, well, this is going to be for children and happy, so let's take a guess where this is going. And when you have Chris Rock narrating, it's like, wonder what happens,
I do think the movie is a little bit racist. I'm just going to say that right off the bat.
Well, I didn't see it, so I can't. That might be the only reason I'd watch it, just to say, like, hey, I feel uncomfortable watching this. That's fucked up. Like, that is the only reason I can foresee watching that movie. Okay. Also, another movie you suggested to me, The Devil All the Time, I watched, where I got to see Spider-Man, Bucky Barnes, a.k.a. the Winter Soldier, John Connor / Terminator, and future Batman all in a movie together and sharing scenes. What do I have to say about this movie? It's not bad. It's bleak as hell. It's interesting, but how they have what is it? Torture porn? That's what this film feels like emotionally. Like all of this is like everybody is either sleazy, a killer, a serial killer, or just violent. And it's like, hey, and all the angelic characters, here's a hint, don't make it. So while that might be true for some people, it just felt like, hey, there's an innocent, let's shovel some shit on him. And that's what it feels like watching this movie. And for a movie with such a big named, huge cast, it's shocking that some people who you would think would last longer in the movie are gone from the film like after 5 minutes. Mostly the female characters. But, I think it was a good movie for Tom Holland. And I thought Robert Pattinson is still trying to show his range in here with his weird accent. But I thought his casting worked the most because here is this character, or here's an actor who was a teen heartthrob playing this angelic vampire. Now here he is as this cute preacher who is just a despicable pedophile who preaches one thing and does the other. And I felt like, okay, that makes sense. The rest of the movie, like I said, if you're into Southern Gothic horror, well, really Southern Gothic drama, this is the movie for you. But it just was very depressing and heavy-handed for me. But I would say if somebody said, should I watch it? If you don't mind any of what I just said, go for it. It's not a bad movie. But I'm not going to sit here and say it's one of the year's best, how some people have been trying to tout it either. How did you feel?
I liked it. I mean, yes, it's distracting having all these superhero actors all in the same movie, but I thought that, it's definitely grim. The whole coming of age story for Tom Holland's character. Like you're with him throughout the story, but there's definitely like a lot of uncertainty that makes it very intriguing to watch, and the creepiness of Robert Pattinson. I think between his performance and that accent, he definitely was like maybe the standout of the picture. And it's not a movie I would watch again because it is kind of uncomfortable, but undoubtedly across the board, I mean, I think it's kind of Oscar worthy in its own right.
Oh, see that we differ there greatly. Okay. Oh, yeah, it's your turn. What movie or television show did you watch recently that you would like to talk about?
I'm going to talk about a really bad one, and it's an oddity that, believe it or not, I kind of liked, and that is Rent-A-Cop with Burt Reynolds and Liza Minnelli. I know.
Well, let me just put in this little quick comment. After Burt Reynolds died, and I wanted to watch more Burt Reynolds movies, that was the first one I picked to watch because I had never. But I remember the commercials for it. But I'll let you say how you felt about it, and then I'll put in my commentary.
So I found it on Amazon Prime, and it was for free. So I just said, let me check this out. First of all, this movie basically is like almost like a quasi sequel to Sharky's Machine. It's almost the same idea of the cop protecting the prostitute, and they end up falling in love with each other. But it's played more like a Walter Hill comedy, like 48 Hours. It's clearly bad. I'm not going to say that this is a good movie at all. I mean, Liza Minnelli is over the top. Burt Reynolds is doing his, grumpy Burt Reynolds act. And yet there's a charm to it that I kind of liked. I mean, he reunites with Bernie Casey, who was in Sharky's Machine. You got Robbie Benson playing Bernie Casey's rookie partner. And you can tell, like, okay, Burt Reynolds is not supposed to like him, but he really likes him because they're so friendly in real life. You got James Remar playing the bad guy. He's basically like an impersonation of the Exterminator because he kills people with a biker helmet and shoots everybody up with a Uzi. And there's dirty cops involved. Basically, it's like a cheaper, bad imitation of Sharky's Machine, but it's actually kind of fun in a bad way. It's like if you're going to get together on Chinese New Year's, get your friends together, and you want to have like a bad movie night, this is the perfect movie to watch on a bad movie, along with All American Murder with Christopher Walken. It's
your favorite.
It's like a weird, guilty pleasure, and I'm surprised it doesn't get enough talk.
It gets talk, probably not the favorite talk that you're giving it. Rent-A-Cop, you could just feel the studio's fingerprints all over this movie. Like, hey, you know who we should team up? Liza Minnelli and Burt Reynolds. I mean, they both had, more big screen careers at the time. But look, I love Liza Minnelli, but Liza Minnelli as a hooker, no. No. Please no. And Burt Reynolds and his hairpiece. That is so distracting watching the movie. And it just felt like with the young partner and Bernie Casey, that is like Formula 101. Like they just walked off of their own sitcom and we're going to do the movie version. And then we're going to focus on one of the other detectives in their department. It's a guilty pleasure, as in The Room is a guilty pleasure. It's something so bad you want to watch and laugh at your friends or laugh with your friends at it because it's just like, how did this? If it's perfectly for that podcast, how did this get made? Which I'm not plugging, But that you sit there constantly like wondering. But if you ever want to see something that encapsulates studio movies of the 1980s, this is it. It's in a bad way,
And that's the thing. Like it feels like when you watch it, it's like they know it's bad. They know the script sucks, but they have fun anyway. I mean, there is like this weird kind of chemistry where it's like Liza Minnelli and Burt Reynolds, they're just bullshitting throughout the whole thing, and they don't care about the seriousness of the plot.
That's pretty much Burt Reynolds throughout the 80s, though, with his movies.
If there was one thing that pissed me off, though, the fact that They had to kill off Dionne Warwick, of all people.
Why
and
not?
You have her playing a madame.
Hey, she should be happy she got that role. Well, actually, maybe she shouldn't be, considering it's Rent-A-Cop.
Well, Solid Gold just got canceled at the time, so maybe she needed something because she wasn't really recording as much at that time.
If anything, she should have worked out in the deal. I get to do the theme song.
Yeah, it could have had a jazz soundtrack like Charlie's Machine. You could have done the theme. Why not?
See, a dropped opportunity. The Rent-A-Cop even dropped their obvious plugins for this.
Yeah, they on the soundtrack.
I'm just like, oh God, Rent-A-Cop. See, that's why I couldn't stop laughing as soon as you mentioned that. It's just, I understand somewhat where you're coming from if you're a lover of bad movies that are entertaining, but it's just like, oh man, that was not the movie I need to see when I wanted to see the legacy of Burt Reynolds, fresh off of, unfortunately, him dying. You want to see the best, not one of the worst ones he made. I'm actually going to bring up something that is not a movie that I watched. I did not know that this show had actually been on YouTube, a YouTube original at first, and it just started on Amazon Prime. I watched a show by the name of Wayne, and the only reason I even watched it was because I knew nothing about it, and it just has this title, Wayne. And really it says from the writers of Deadpool. So that intrigued me. What I got was basically a vigilante road trip movie about a kid named Wayne who's basically from Boston. And he basically is the bully of bulliers. Like if he sees someone getting bullied, he'll go and beat the hell out of whoever's the bullies are, and even if he doesn't win, he'll make sure he finishes the fight. So basically, after his father dies, he decides to go on a road trip to go claim his father's Trans Am Corvette car from wherever it is. He finds out it's in Florida with his estranged mother. So he goes on a road trip to go find it, and he takes a girl who he just met with him. And the series basically follows them on their little adventures, but also the cops from Boston looking for him and her father and her two brothers going after him. Look, it's not the best plotted show, but it is entertaining week to week because there's fights galore and there's a lot of dark comedy. And I found the show very entertaining, and I think it deserves maybe a little bigger audience. I mean, there aren't really big names in the cast unless, you know, you are really a fan of Dean Winters from Oz and the Mr. Mayhem commercials. He plays the girl's father. And the guy, let's see, I don't even remember, so I'm not going to say this guy's name. I didn't give you his resume. But basically, I think it's worth watching. It's kind of hyper stylized, sort of like, not as stylish as Scott Pilgrim, but it almost feels like a video game / real world in its own way. I don't highly suggest it, but I would definitely recommend if looking for something different or a new series to watch.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. I think I've seen a trailer for it once, but I haven't really seen it yet.
I'm hoping it gets a season 2. Hopefully, if it gets viewers, there might be a season 2. But again, this show was made like a year ago for YouTube, and Amazon just got it. So hopefully, people discover it. Do you have any other things that you saw this week you'd like to discuss? Television, movie?
Nothing really major. Probably just start wrapping it up.
Oh, okay. Because the only other thing I would suggest, I don't know if you saw it, The Queen's Gambit. With Anna.
My mom has actually been watching it, but I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, I would highly suggest it because I'm going to go with the crowd. It's very addictive because once you start, it feels like you can't stop. You want to keep it going. And it's basically this girl's life and the places and people she meets through playing professional chess. And Anya Taylor-Joy, I think she's a phenomenal British actress. And she plays the hell out of this role. And it's just so, it's hard to explain. It's just so addictive. It's sort of like, you know how sometimes you have one cookie or one slice of cake and it's just so good you find yourself eating it more and more, and before you know it, it's all gone. That's what it's like watching this show. I can't really put it in words. It's more of an experience, but everything is on point. Music, acting, direction. It's directed and written by Scott Frank, who also did Netflix's Godless, and who also wrote and directed a little movie by the name, which I can't remember, of course, with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, where he had a memory problem and he lived with Jeff Daniels as his blind roommate, and they end up getting involved with these criminals who rob a bank.
Oh, the Lookout.
Yeah, that's another film I would highly suggest that if people don't know about, they should try that film. But definitely it's miles different from that movie. But this is just as addictive and a different viewpoint than what you might expect. So since you have no other things to talk about, and I just want to get in that last plug, unfortunately, everybody, November's Unfinished Business episode is over. But we will be back next month with a whole bunch of movie news and a whole bunch of views. So this is Jeff Galishaw saying goodbye for right now. And I have to ask, have you seen Lady Bird? If not, why not? Because it's fucking awesome. Andre?
Have you seen the 1978 film Blood Brothers? If not, why not? Because it's fucking awesome.
And this is us signing out for this week. You all know where you can reach us and where you can find our blogs and reviews. If not, look in the comments. Until then, we will talk to you next month.